Long before the Arctic appeared as a blank white circle on modern maps, the Greeks filled it with imagination. They called it Hyperborea, the land beyond Boreas, the north wind. In their language, the name itself drew a boundary between the known and the impossible. To cross Boreas was to leave the human world behind. Yet for centuries, poets, historians, and travellers insisted that someone had lived there. In the histories, Herodotus recorded the rumour without endorsing it. He wrote that north of the Isidonies, a people called the Hyperboreans lived in perpetual sunshine, sending sacred offerings south to the island of Delos. The root of these gifts, handed from tribe to tribe across thousands of kilometres, suggested not fantasy, but memory. Herodotus admitted he had no proof, but he preserved the story anyway, as though it carried a truth older than verification. Pindar, a century earlier, had gone further. In his odes, he described the Hyperboreans as living free of disease and toil, celebrating eternally under clear skies, their lives stretching for centuries. He mentioned Apollo leaving Greece each winter to dwell among them, bringing light and music to a place where darkness never came. To the Greeks, such an idea reversed the natural order. The north was supposed to be barren and frozen, but in myth, Hyperborea was warm, fertile, and serene, a mirror world that defied geography. Later writers elaborated the picture. Hecataeus of Abdera, summarizing older sources, located Hyperborea on a large island as big as Sicily, surrounded by ocean and blessed by a mild climate. He described a great circular city aligned with the stars and temples of shining gold. No ancient traveller ever confirmed it, yet the same details appeared repeatedly. The circular city, the gentle light, the god who dwelt among them. Repetition alone suggests a common source, whether a shared mythic template or echoes of a place once real. The consistency of these accounts poses a question that history still cannot answer. Why did the Greeks imagine paradise at the pole? They had no experience of high-latitude light, yet their descriptions of the land where the sun never sets match modern observations of the Arctic Circle. During summer there, the sun indeed remains above the horizon for weeks. How could Mediterranean writers, centuries before systematic exploration, have known this? Several explanations exist. Some historians suggest indirect contact with northern traders, Scythians, or early peoples of the steppe, who had seen the long days firsthand. Others think the image arose from astronomical reasoning. If the sun climbs higher in summer, the farther one goes north, then beyond a certain line it must never sink. Whatever its origin, the idea tied physical geography to divine order. Hyperborea was not just a remote country, it was the symbolic opposite of chaos, a world of balance, abundance, and enduring light. In Greek religion, that light took form in Apollo. His winter journey from Delos to the north paralleled the seasonal movement of the sun. Each spring, when he returned, the Greeks held festivals marking both his reappearance and the end of darkness. The story turned a natural rhythm into theology. Hyperborea became the solar homeland, the hidden source of renewal. By late antiquity, writers no longer believed literally in the Hyperboreans, but the name endured. Geographers placed it at the edge of their maps, near the Riparian Mountains or the Arctic Ocean. Philosophers used it as shorthand for unattainable perfection. Even when faith in the myth faded, its coordinates remained, a blank northern space labelled with memory. Modern scholarship often treats Hyperborea as a metaphor, an imagined utopia created to balance the Greek fear of barbaric frontiers. Yet dismissing it entirely overlooks an important pattern. Every ancient civilization invented a north, a pure origin, a land of ancestors, or a realm of light. In Greek thought, Hyperborea embodied all three. The persistence of the story through different authors hints that it served more than poetic convenience. Myths tend to dissolve when they lose meaning, This one did not. Instead, it shifted from religion to geography, from geography to speculation. By the Renaissance, mapmakers would still draw islands in the far north, carrying fragments of the old description. The first step toward understanding whether Hyperborea could have been real is to trace how that belief survived the centuries. Myths do not travel alone. They leave cartographic and linguistic footprints. The Greeks, by naming a place they had never seen, created a direction for later explorers to follow. If a myth can persist for 2 millennia, perhaps it preserved more than imagination. Perhaps it carried information. To test that possibility, we must examine the evidence left not by poets, but by cartographers, the maps that try to turn legend into measurement. If you're enjoying this journey into forgotten myths, take a moment to like this video. It helps the story reach others who love ancient mysteries. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? We love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Imagine you're watching an old map unroll across a wooden table, its edges yellowed, its center still blank. In the candlelight, the mapmaker hesitates. He knows the coasts of Europe and Asia, the deserts of Africa, the rich ports of the Indies. But when his quill reaches the far north, there is only white space, a void he cannot leave untouched. And so, he begins to draw. This is how the legend of Hyperborea found its way into geography. During the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, mapmakers faced a paradox. The more they learned about the world, the more its edges demanded meaning. The Arctic, unseen and unreachable, became a place where imagination filled the gaps left by exploration. At the heart of this transformation stands Gerardus Mercator, the 16th century Flemish cartographer whose name still defines modern navigation. His 1569 projection revolutionized the way sailors charted the seas, but it is his earlier, lesser-known 1531 map, Septentrionalium Terrarum Descriptio, that hides a deeper mystery. There, at the top of the world, Mercator drew an island divided into 4 perfect quadrants, each split by great rivers converging at a central whirlpool. At the pole stood a black magnetic mountain, so high, he wrote, that it draws all the waters of the world toward it. This image wasn't his invention. He cited an older account, the lost travel diary of Nicholas of Lynn, an English Franciscan friar who supposedly voyaged into the Arctic around 1360 under the patronage of King Edward III. His chronicle, Inventio Fortunata, the discovery of the Fortunate Islands, has never been found. According to later summaries preserved by Jacob Noyen and quoted by Mercator himself, Nicholas described islands rich in minerals, strong magnetic forces that pulled iron needles northward, and a great opening in the sea at the pole. He spoke of lands where the sun circled endlessly above the horizon, a phrase that must have sounded impossible to his contemporaries, but which we now know perfectly matches the behaviour of the Arctic sun in midsummer. As a narrator, imagine standing over that map, the inked rivers spiralling inward, the perfect geometry giving form to myth. For Mercator, Hyperborea was not fantasy, it was evidence, compiled testimony from explorers, scholars, and ancient texts that together implied a hidden land. He was not alone. Orontius Phineus, in his 1531 map, drew a nearly identical configuration. 4 landmasses divided by water at the top of the globe. A generation later, Abraham Ortelius, the creator of the first modern atlas, labelled these northern islands explicitly as Hyperboreae. Others, like Ptolemaeus Ruscelli and Felipe Boache, perpetuated the idea, blending it with emerging knowledge of polar magnetism. These maps shared uncanny consistency. Historians later asked how so many cartographers could independently depict the same non-existent geography. Was it simple plagiarism, one copying another, or were they all working from a now-lost archetype? Some researchers, including Charles Hapgood in his 1966 book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, argued that the answer might lie in deep antiquity, that these Renaissance maps were derived from prehistoric charts dating before the last ice age, created by an advanced seafaring culture. Most modern scholars dismiss that claim as speculative, yet anomalies remain. On the Piri Reis map 1513, drawn in Ottoman Turkey, the southern continent, long before Antarctica was discovered, is outlined with surprising accuracy beneath ice. In the north, similar patterns appear: faint coastlines, circular islands, and even notes of temperate weather conditions inconsistent with the modern Arctic. Some of these contours match the seabed revealed by today's satellite imaging. Coincidence or echo? From a scientific viewpoint, there's a more measured explanation. During the medieval warm period, roughly 950–1250 CE, sections of the Arctic were indeed less icy. Norse settlers reached Greenland and parts of North America, and sailors may have seen regions of open water much farther north than expected. When they returned, they would describe green coasts, long daylight, and strange magnetic phenomena. Over generations, those reports could evolve into the geometric utopia of Mercator's Hyperborea, memory refracted through imagination. But medieval cosmology also played its part. To a Renaissance mind, the world had to be symmetrical. If paradise was placed at the east, another sacred centre must exist at the north, the roof of the world. Classical texts reinforced this symmetry. Herodotus, Pindar, and Diodorus all spoke of a blessed northern race who lived in harmony, untouched by war or time. By giving those legends coordinates, cartographers merged theology and topography. Blank spaces were intolerable. Every uncharted region needed meaning: Eden, the antipodes, or the lands beyond Boreas. Filling the map was an act of order, even faith. The circular island of the Hyperboreans fit perfectly into that worldview. 4 balanced continents surrounding the world's axis, a mirror of divine geometry. What fascinates modern researchers is the mathematical precision of these early maps. The concentric design of Mercator's north, rivers at right angles, mountain at the centre, resembles mandalas found in Hindu and Buddhist art, diagrams of cosmic harmony. To the Renaissance cartographer, drawing the world's top was an act of philosophy as much as navigation. Outside Europe, echoes of a similar idea appear. The Arab geographer al-Idrisi, in his Tabula Rogeriana 1154, hinted at lands near the pole where the sea freezes like glass and daylight lasts for months. Chinese sources from the Tang dynasty describe northern regions where the sun never sets. None used the name Hyperborea, but all pointed toward a common concept, a liminal zone between the human and the cosmic. Modern technology allows us to analyze these old maps with new tools. When digital overlays compare Mercator's pole with today's topography, the circular island aligns roughly with the Lomonosov Ridge and Alpha Mendeleev Rise, submerged continental features under the Arctic Ocean. To some, this is mere coincidence. To others, it's a geological fingerprint of a once habitable north. So here lies the paradox. Maps drawn to eliminate myth ended up preserving it. The more precisely cartographers measured the world, the more the unknown clung to their compasses. They could not resist giving form to the formless. Hyperborea became a bridge between science and story, a reminder that even the most rational age still dreams at the edges of its charts. To test that coincidence, we need to leave parchment behind and turn to the ground itself. The maps may have faded, but the Earth retains a longer memory, written not in ink, but in layers of ice and pollen that record the North as it once was. When we look for Hyperborea, we're really searching the Earth's own archives, and the most reliable witness is the climate itself. Beneath the modern Arctic, beneath its silence and cold, lies a record written not in words, but in ice, sediment, and ancient air. To read it is to unroll the planet's memory, layer by layer, and discover that the far north was once green, wet, and alive. In the laboratories of Copenhagen, scientists study cylinders of ice extracted from Greenland's ice sheet, each one over 3 kilometers long, a frozen timeline stretching back 120,000 years. Under magnification, those layers reveal trapped bubbles of atmosphere, dust from ancient winds, volcanic ash, and even microscopic pollen. Each bubble is a tiny time capsule, and together they form a near-continuous diary of the planet's climate. What those ice cores reveal is astonishing. The Arctic's climate has never been static. It has swung violently from cold to warm and back again. These sharp temperature jumps, known as Dansgaard-Oeschger events, raised regional temperatures by up to 10 degrees Celsius in mere decades. In human terms, that's the difference between tundra and forest, between survival and abundance. One such period, around 130,000 years ago, known as the Eemian Interglacial, transformed the Arctic into a landscape of rivers and forests. Fossil pollen found deep in Siberian permafrost, and the new Siberian islands shows that birch, alder, and even larch once grew far beyond today's tree line. In northern Canada and Alaska, researchers have uncovered peat deposits and rich soil layers buried under modern permafrost, evidence of meadows where musk oxen grazed and humans could easily have followed. Satellite radar has even mapped ancient river valleys beneath the Greenland ice, suggesting that before its most recent freeze, that island was drained by flowing water, perhaps even open plains. From a documentary lens, imagine the camera descending through translucent ice, first to faint lines of sediment, then to preserved pollen grains, glowing gold under magnification, proof that the Arctic once bloomed. This discovery reframes the myth of the land beyond Boreas. If entire forests once stretched toward the pole, then the Hyperboreans' eternal daylight might not have been fantasy, but observation passed down from ancestors who had seen the midnight sun themselves. Archaeology supports this possibility. At the Yana rhinoceros horn site in Siberia, artifacts dating back 27,000 years, spears carved from mammoth ivory, decorated beads, and dwelling structures show that humans lived in high latitudes long before the Ice Age ended. These were not desperate nomads. They were engineers of survival, adapting to cycles of freezing and thawing. Farther north, on Zhukov Island, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of 8,000-year-old sled runners, bone tools, and traces of domesticated dogs, the earliest evidence of dog breeding for transport. Their wooden dwellings once stood on solid tundra, now broken apart by sea ice. These weren't temporary camps, they were the northernmost homes of the early Holocene world, living proof that humans could thrive at the very edge of the map. Imagine that moment from above, a drone shot across an ancient landscape now drowned beneath the Laptov Sea. Herds of reindeer graze, where sonar now detects submerged plains. Meltwater rivers weave across the horizon. The world of Hyperborea wasn't frozen. It was moving, glowing, and alive. But then came the Younger Dryas, around 12,900 years ago. Temperatures plummeted across the northern hemisphere within decades. Glaciers surged, winds shifted, and the fragile warmth of the Arctic collapsed. The lush plains of Beringia, the land bridge connecting Siberia and Alaska, drowned as sea levels rose by more than 100 meters. What had been a cradle of migration turned into an abyss. For the people living through that collapse, the change would have felt apocalyptic. The sun's path shortened, herds vanished, rivers froze. They fled south, carrying with them fading stories of a homeland of light, a golden land swallowed by cold. Over generations, those stories became myths: Hyperborea, Thule, Tir na nog, all remembering the same lost north through different tongues. Geologists call the period that followed the Holocene the relatively stable era we live in today. But even within this calm, the Arctic has continued to pulse. Fossil DNA and sediment cores show repeating warm phases, brief interludes when the tundra turned green again. Each time life returned, only to be erased once more by ice. Modern scientists studying these cycles warn that climate can change not gradually, but abruptly, within a human lifetime. The ice cores prove it. Each warm spike ends with a sudden plunge. That volatility mirrors the rhythm of myth. Golden ages followed by catastrophe, rebirth after loss. It's as if the planet itself breathes in epochs, and human culture records the exhale as story. Seen in this light, Hyperborea is not impossibility. It is inevitability. It represents the memory of those narrow windows when the Arctic was open, when the North was more than a void. For centuries, scholars dismissed the myth because it seemed climatically absurd. But the data from Greenland and Siberia overturns that assumption. There were times, again and again, when a temperate Arctic was real. To the human imagination, that memory endured as a paradise, a world of eternal light lost beneath ice. And if climate is the Earth's memory, then myth is ours. Both point to the same truth. The North has awakened and vanished many times and may yet awaken again. As our modern glaciers retreat faster than ever recorded, we are quite literally uncovering those memories. Mammoth bones, ancient soils, even the DNA of vanished ecosystems. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding how myth and geology once spoke the same language. And perhaps that's the greatest paradox of all, that the story of Hyperborea might have begun not in fantasy, but in fact buried in the climate's long rhythm between warmth and ice. The next question, then, is whether those fleeting civilizations left any cultural or mythological legacy recognizable today. If they did, we might expect to find echoes of a vanished North, not only in Greek legend, but in the oral traditions of other peoples who once lived closer to it. If the story of Hyperborea had existed only in Greek imagination, it would have faded with their civilization. Yet it didn't. Echoes of the same northern paradise, a land of light, youth, and eternal spring, appear across cultures separated by oceans and millennia. This persistence suggests not coincidence, but memory. Different peoples, living in different ages, seem to recall the same event, a real world that once existed in the far north before the ice returned. Among the Celts, that memory took the form of Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth. In ancient Irish epics, it was said to lie far across the western sea, where no one aged and no sickness ever touched the body. Heroes such as Oisin and Bran journeyed there, guided by ethereal women or enchanted ships, only to find that time flowed differently. When they returned, centuries had passed. It wasn't heaven, it was a place, real and reachable to those who knew the way. In early medieval manuscripts, artists even drew Tir na Nog as a glowing island bathed in golden light, not unlike the descriptions of Hyperborea. But as we turn the camera northward, another version of the myth appears. The Norse sagas speak of Thule, a mysterious land at the world's crown. The explorer Pytheas of Massalia, writing around 330 BCE, claimed to have sailed there 6 days north of Britain to a place where the sun did not set and the air shimmered like glass. Later writers dismissed him as a fantasist, yet modern science confirms his detail. Above the Arctic Circle, the sun truly circles the horizon for weeks, never sinking. What Pytheas saw may have been Norway's northern coast, or perhaps Iceland, but the experience of perpetual day left a mark that became myth. In the poetic Edda, the Norse described the gods themselves, the Aesir, as descendants of a northern homeland beyond the winds, a world of radiant plains and shining bridges. Scholars once dismissed this as poetic invention, but it aligns with something older, an ancestral migration southward following the last ice age. The memory of a northern origin remained encoded in the myths of Odin, Bifrost, and Asgard, each symbol a relic of that journey from light into shadow. Travel east, and you find the same pattern carried in the voices of the Arctic's indigenous peoples. Among the Nenets, Yakut, and Chukchi, elders still tell stories of a time when the sky's fire never went out. The reindeer grazed in warmth, rivers flowed northward into a shining sea, and there was no darkness. Then one day, the fire in the sky died, and the world turned to ice. In Siberian rock art, carved thousands of years before writing, the same tale appears in images. Suns with long spiral rays, herds of animals fleeing south, hunters following them. Anthropologists who have compared these oral traditions note the same three recurring motifs. A northern homeland, once fertile and full of light. A cataclysmic cooling, often described as the death of the sun. A migration southward, carrying knowledge, songs, and memories of that lost world. What myth remembers, climate science now confirms. During repeated warming cycles, the last of them ending roughly 12,000 years ago, the Arctic did sustain human life. Vast regions now underwater, such as Beringia, were fertile plains. When global temperatures plunged during the Younger Dryas, those lands vanished under floods and ice, forcing entire cultures to move south. What we read as myth may be encoded migration memory. Stories of displacement told so vividly they survived millennia. Even the Finno-Ugric and Sami peoples of northern Europe preserve songs that seem to echo this pattern. Their ancient poems speak of the first land, where night and day were one, and of a great white storm that ended it. Modern linguists trace some of their oldest words, for ice, light, and direction, to protoforms that predate the last glacial maximum. The human vocabulary itself carries fossils of that Arctic experience. Across continents, the imagery repeats. The Celts envisioned Tir na Nog as a golden island. The Greeks imagined Hyperborea as a ring of rivers and light. The Norse saw Thule as a threshold between worlds. The Siberians remembered the shining plains. The pattern is too consistent to ignore. These were not borrowed stories. They were parallel memories, each retelling a shared trauma of environmental collapse. What's even more striking is how these myths link cosmic balance with moral decline. In almost every version, the loss of the northern paradise coincides with humanity's fall from harmony. The Hyperboreans live in peace until the world grows cold. The Tuatha De Danann of Irish lore are exiled after misusing their powers. The Sami's northern gods withdraw when people forget the old ways. It's as though the physical cooling of the world became inseparable from a spiritual one. In modern terms, these stories preserve not just data about past climates, but emotion, the sense of loss, exile, and yearning that followed each collapse. Archaeology and genetics now confirm waves of migration from Siberia into Europe and Asia during these periods, just as the myths describe. The DNA of modern Europeans carries traces of those northern ancestors, the same populations that once walked the sunlit tundras of the late Pleistocene. When people move, they carry their world with them, in memory, in story, in ritual. Over generations, those stories solidify into cosmology. For the Greeks, Hyperborea became a perfect reflection of order. For the Celts, Tir na Nog became a promise of return. For the Norse, Thule marked both the origin and the end of time. To see these as fantasies is to underestimate how myth works. Myths are compressed history, stories distilled to survive when all else is lost. The repetition of detail, endless sunlight, sudden ice, migration, is not coincidence. It is evidence of collective remembrance. So when we hear about Hyperborea, we are not listening to one people's imagination. we're listening to the echo of humanity's first exile, a time when climate itself forced us to move and to remember, and when different civilizations, scattered by oceans, all point north to describe paradise. It tells us something profound. They were looking back at the same horizon, the same vanished homeland where light never died. To understand why this memory endured, we must now turn to the sky, to the one thing that all these peoples could still see no matter where they went, the stars that circled above the pole, forever reminding them of the world they lost. When ancient eyes turned to the night sky, they did not see abstraction. They saw structure, order, rhythm, design. The heavens were not empty. They were a mirror of earth. And at the center of that mirror, unmoving and eternal, was the north, the still point of the stars, the axis around which creation revolved. If Hyperborea was ever real, it survived here, not on land, but in the sky. For millennia, people looked upward and saw what they could no longer find on Earth, a world of stability beyond change, the celestial echo of a northern paradise. Thousands of years before telescopes, early astronomers across cultures identified one unique feature in the heavens, a star that did not wander. While constellations wheeled in great circles, this single point held steady, marking the invisible axis of the Earth. Today, we call it Polaris, but in ancient times, that role belonged to another, Thuban, the pale heart of the constellation Draco. Around 2800 BCE, Thuban stood almost exactly above the North Pole, a perfect cosmic pivot. Because the Earth's axis slowly wobbles, a phenomenon known as precession of the equinoxes, the celestial pole drifts across the sky over a 26,000-year cycle. As one pole star fades, another takes its place. Ancient astronomers knew nothing of axial tilt or precession in mathematical terms, yet they observed its slow movement. To them, the shift of the heavens was the breath of the cosmos, and the north, its eternal center. Across civilizations, this point became sacred. The Egyptians called the circumpolar stars the imperishables, those that never sank below the horizon. Pharaohs aligned their pyramids to them, not by accident, but with cosmic intent. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, built around 2550 BCE, has ventilation shafts aimed directly at Thuban and Orion's belt. In life, the pharaoh ruled Egypt. In death, his soul would ascend along those shafts to join the unsetting stars, eternally circling the pole. The Egyptian version of immortality. In India, ancient Vedic texts describe Mount Meru, the golden mountain at the center of all worlds. Its summit touched the heavens. Its base divided the earth into 4 quarters through rivers flowing outward, the same geometry seen in early Renaissance maps of the North Pole. According to the Mahabharata, Meru's peak was crowned with light that never waned, and around it revolved the stars. This was not a poetic coincidence. Mount Meru was the cosmic pole, the axis mundi itself. In China, astronomers spoke of the purple forbidden enclosure, a cluster of stars near the pole around which the heavens turned. The emperor's throne room mirrored this structure, square at the base, circular above, symbolizing heaven and earth joined by a central pillar. The emperor was considered the earthly pole star, maintaining balance as the sky revolved around him. Even in Mesoamerica, half a world away, ancient builders aligned their temples to the same cosmic order. The Olmec and later Maya constructed pyramids and observatories oriented toward true north and solstice points. The Great Pyramid of El Castillo at Chichen Itza forms a serpent of light on the equinox, an earthly reflection of celestial movement. To the Maya, this axis linked the underworld, the living world, and the heavens, just as Mount Meru did in the east. Why did so many civilizations separated by oceans worship the same direction? The answer may lie in experience. As one travels north, the stars appear to circle higher until they never set. a phenomenon that can only be understood by those who lived near the Arctic Circle. The idea of a place where the sun and stars never die likely originated from that first-hand vision. For people forced south by ice, the memory of that unending light became divine. From this, a grand idea emerged, that the world was connected by an invisible pillar, the celestial axis, linking earth and sky. Hyperborea, beyond the north wind, could be the physical reflection of that pillar. A land once aligned with the heavens, where cosmic order was mirrored on earth. Archaeoastronomy, a modern discipline bridging archaeology and astrophysics, finds material proof of this worldview. The Goseck Circle in Germany, built around 4800 BCE, predates Stonehenge by 2 millennia. It is a perfect circular observatory, aligned to the winter solstice sunrise and sunset, an early attempt to measure the turning of the light. Later, Stonehenge refined that design, orienting its giant trilithons toward the midsummer sunrise. From Europe to Asia, similar monuments appear. The Nabta Playa circle in the Egyptian desert, aligned to Sirius and the rising solstice sun. The Newgrange Passage tomb in Ireland, where light penetrates a narrow corridor only on the winter solstice. The Chaco Canyon in North America, where petroglyphs mark solar and lunar cycles with astonishing precision. All these sites, though thousands of kilometers apart, express the same cosmic truth, an obsession with the balance between light and darkness, and the invisible axis that governs their rhythm. Even the myths of Apollo, the solar god, preserve this link. Each winter, when the sun sank low, Apollo was said to leave Greece and travel north to Hyperborea. His absence marked the darkest season. His return heralded spring. This was not merely poetic, it mirrored the sun's annual journey along the ecliptic, reaching its lowest point at the solstice before rising again. Hyperborea, in that sense, was the celestial north, the destination of light during its rebirth. From a modern scientific perspective, the myth encoded axial tilt, the 23.5-degree lean that gives Earth its seasons. From a symbolic one, it embodied humanity's early realization that life depends on cosmic balance. Too much tilt, and the poles would burn or freeze. Too little, and the Earth would stagnate in perpetual twilight. Everywhere, the same motif returns. A mountain, a pillar, a star that never dies. This is the archetype of orientation, the idea that the universe has a fixed heart and that humanity's survival depends on aligning with it. The loss of Hyperborea in geography did not erase its presence in architecture, astronomy, or myth. What disappeared on the map remained fixed in the sky. To trace its survival on Earth, we must now descend from the heavens to the frozen ground, to look for the material traces of life that once occupied the lands the ancients called eternal. If Hyperborea ever existed, it would not be found in ruins of stone or metal, but in fragments buried beneath the Arctic's shifting ice. The paradox is that ice both preserves and destroys. It erases structures, but keeps the landscape sealed in time. To find Hyperborea, scientists have learned to read the language of the frozen Earth itself, the sediments, fossils, and faint signals of human life that still whisper from beneath the permafrost. Let's begin on Zhukov Island, a wind-scoured land in the new Siberian archipelago. Today it is desolate, a polar desert where the temperature rarely rises above freezing. Yet in the 1990s, Russian archaeologists led by Vladimir Pitulko uncovered something extraordinary there. The remains of semi-permanent dwellings built from driftwood and mammoth bone. Inside lay tools, spear points, and sled runners crafted from reindeer antler and ivory. Radiocarbon dating placed them at about 8,000 years old, long after the last ice age ended. But what astonished researchers most were the dog bones, over 100 of them. DNA testing later revealed that they were genetically close to early domesticated dogs, among the oldest known in the Arctic. These animals were not wild companions. They were bred for transport, pulling sleds across a vast frozen network of trade and travel. That single sight paints a vivid picture. People not merely surviving, but organising, planning, and adapting to one of Earth's harshest regions. Wooden stakes and hearthstones showed evidence of repeated rebuilding, suggesting the inhabitants returned year after year. They hunted polar bears, seals, and reindeer, crafting clothing from furs and sinew. This was not a transient camp. It was a functioning settlement, proof that humans could thrive where modern maps show only ice. But Zhukov Island is just one chapter. Travel 2,000 kilometers west to the Yana rhinoceros horn site near the lower Yana River in Siberia. There, beneath layers of permafrost, scientists have unearthed over 2,500 artifacts dating back 27,000 years, long before agriculture, before dynasties, before the great civilizations of the South even existed. Carved ivory tools, decorated beads, and spearheads fashioned from mammoth tusk tell of people who not only endured but mastered their Arctic world. Microscopic analysis of the ivory shows precise shaping by heated flint, an innovation that required control of fire and planning of resources. Even in the depths of an ice age, the inhabitants of Yana built semi-subterranean shelters insulated with hides and bone, protected from the relentless winds. For decades, archaeologists believed the far north was uninhabitable during such periods. These discoveries changed that view forever. The Arctic, it seems, was not a barren void, but a corridor of life, connecting continents through what we now call Beringia, a massive grassland stretching from Siberia to Alaska. During warmer phases, this land bridge teemed with rivers, lakes, and wildlife. Reindeer and mammoths roamed freely across what is now submerged under the Bering and Chukchi seas. Hunters followed them, leaving traces of their camps and hearths. When the glaciers advanced again, they moved south, carrying memories of their vanished homeland, memories that might have evolved into the myths of Hyperborea or the land of eternal light. The Earth, too, remembers. Using ground-penetrating radar, scientists can now see beneath the ice sheets, tracing buried valleys and ancient drainage systems once filled with water. In Greenland, radar imaging has revealed networks of long-vanished rivers winding beneath more than 2 kilometers of ice. In Antarctica, researchers using ice-penetrating radar detected entire mountain ranges, such as the Gamburtsev Mountains, hidden below the frozen crust. Aerial satellite scans have uncovered linear ridges and basins beneath the Arctic Ocean, possible traces of prehistoric river channels. In 2022, NASA's Operation Icebridge project released visual data showing undulating terrain beneath Greenland's ice, eerily similar to river plains seen elsewhere in temperate climates. These findings suggest that the Arctic's bedrock once supported flowing water, forests, and perhaps even migration routes. In 2017, the British Antarctic Survey made one of the most striking discoveries: fossilised roots and pollen beneath the Pine Island Glacier. The remains belong to a temperate rainforest, mosses, ferns and trees that thrived in polar latitudes 90 million years ago. Though this predates human existence, it demonstrates the incredible volatility of polar climates. The Arctic, too, has cycled between warmth and freeze countless times. More recent sediment cores from the Lomonosov Ridge, the undersea mountain chain spanning the Arctic Ocean, contain layers of freshwater diatoms and organic matter, signs that vast sections of the polar basin were once shallow lakes or marshes. These cores preserve pollen from pine and birch, confirming that temperate vegetation reached latitudes we now consider uninhabitable. The idea that humans could have lived in such regions is no longer fringe speculation. With each season of melting ice, new discoveries appear: the tusks of mammoths eroding from Siberian cliffs, the peat beds of long-buried forests, even ancient DNA sequences extracted from soil, genetic fingerprints of extinct ecosystems that once supported human life. If legend is memory, then the ice itself is a physical memory, frozen testimony of changing worlds. It erases architecture, yes, but it preserves context. Every fossilized leaf, every trapped grain of pollen is a word in the Earth's own story. So when we read myths of Hyperborea, a land of light, warmth, and harmony swallowed by cold, they may not be fictions at all, but recollections of these lost interglacial worlds. A time when the Arctic was green, when rivers cut through plains now buried under kilometers of ice. And as the planet warms again, that hidden history begins to emerge. Each summer, the permafrost retreats, revealing bones, tools, and soil dark with ancient carbon. What scientists call thawing ground might just be the Earth remembering. Hyperborea, then, is not gone. It's simply waiting, beneath ice that is melting faster each year. Its story may soon rise again, not as legend, but as evidence. The next question is not what lies below, but what happened when the myth was reborn in the modern age. When explorers and ideologues tried to claim the North for themselves and to turn legend into identity. By the end of the 19th century, Hyperborea, once a myth of harmony and eternal light, began to take on a new, far darker shape. What had once symbolized unity with nature and divine order was recast as a tool for identity, power, and control. It was no longer a story about humanity's forgotten dawn, but about who had the right to claim that dawn as their own. The revival began in the shadow of the Industrial Age, when science, colonialism, and spiritual disillusionment collided. The world was being mapped, measured, and categorized. The Arctic, still mysterious, still unreachable, became the perfect screen for projection. Explorers, mystics, and scholars alike began to look north not for truth, but for meaning. The central figure in this transformation was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the Russian-born mystic who founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. In her monumental 1888 work, The Secret Doctrine, she described the evolution of humanity through a series of root races. One of these, she claimed, had originated in Hyperborea, a continent located near the North Pole, destroyed by geological catastrophe. Blavatsky blended myth, Hindu cosmology, biblical allegory, and speculative geology. Her Hyperboreans were not simply ancient people. They were the second race of humanity, ethereal beings who communicated through thought rather than speech, radiant with spiritual light. In her cosmology, Hyperborea was both a lost world and a lost state of consciousness. For late 19th century readers, this fusion of mysticism and pseudoscience was intoxicating. Blavatsky's writings spread rapidly through Europe and America, shaping early occult and esoteric movements. Artists, philosophers, and mystics began to speak of the poles as gateways to higher realms, a spiritual geography echoing the physical. But myths have gravity, and once unmoored from context, they attract distortion. In early 20th century Germany and Austria, Blavatsky's mystical Hyperborea was stripped of its spiritual ideals and reshaped into a racial myth. Writers like Guido von List and Lanz von Liebenfels reinterpreted her root races as literal bloodlines. They argued that the Hyperboreans were the divine ancestors of the Aryan peoples, pure, noble, and fated to rule. Liebenfels, in particular, filled his writings with symbols of solar worship and northern purity. He published journals claiming that modern humanity had degenerated from the godlike Hyperboreans through intermixing with lower races. The myth of light was now a doctrine of exclusion. By 1918, these ideas had found a home in the Thule Society, a secret nationalist order founded in Munich. The name Thule was drawn from ancient Greek and Norse sources, their version of Hyperborea, a northern homeland beyond the world's edge. Its emblem, a swastika framed by oak leaves, symbolized the eternal cycle of sun and race. Members gathered to discuss esotericism, runic symbols, and Germanic destiny. The Society's meetings mixed mysticism with politics, preaching that Germany's defeat in World War I could be redeemed by a return to its ancient northern essence. Among its members were Rudolf Hess and Dietrich Eckart, both of whom would later become early mentors to Adolf Hitler. The transition from occult philosophy to political ideology was complete. To these men, Hyperborea was no longer metaphor, but origin myth. It provided what all empires crave, a divine ancestry. The North, once imagined as the universal cradle of light, became a private inheritance used to justify racial hierarchy. The myth of the eternal sun became the emblem of a chosen people. Meanwhile, explorers were taking these legends literally. Between 1890 and the 1930s, a wave of polar expeditions sought not just scientific discovery, but revelation. Maps of the time still marked phantom islands, Franz Josef Land, Crocker Land, and Sanikoff Land, supposed fragments of a lost Arctic continent. Expeditions sponsored by governments and spiritualists alike sailed into the ice, convinced they might find remnants of Hyperborea itself. When none were found, the myth deepened. Conspiracy replaced exploration. Some claimed the land had sunk into the sea, others said it was hidden inside the earth, accessible through polar openings. In the 1930s, a fringe of German occultists adopted the hollow earth theory, imagining that the true Hyperborea lay beneath the poles, glowing with inner sunlight. Archival footage from that era shows German scientists unfurling maps labelled Neue Schwabenland, a section of Antarctica they claimed for the Reich in 1939. Some Nazi ideologues believed it could be a remnant of the original polar homeland. Their symbolism was unmistakable. The black sun, the runic sigils, the north as the axis of rebirth. But history has a way of reclaiming its myths. After the war, as the ideology that hijacked Hyperborea collapsed, serious science began to return to the Arctic. Expeditions in Siberia, Greenland, and Alaska uncovered real evidence of ancient habitation, Zhukov Island, Yana River, and the remains of early Arctic trade. Yet this genuine discovery was nearly overshadowed by decades of pseudoscientific noise. The tragedy of the 20th century's obsession with Hyperborea is not only moral, but intellectual. A story that once connected civilizations through wonder was twisted into justification for domination. What began as a metaphor for enlightenment ended as a blueprint for exclusion. For modern researchers, the task is not to discard the legend, but to reclaim it, to strip away its ideological armor and see the older, truer story underneath. The story of how humans once faced the ice, survived it, and remembered the world that came before. Beneath the distortions, a quiet truth remains. Hyperborea was never about blood or empire. It was about light, cycles, and renewal, the human dream of returning to balance with the world. To follow that truth, we must now leave behind politics and myth-making and return to what cannot lie, the Earth itself. Beneath the Arctic Ocean's frozen crust lie plains, ridges, and drowned coastlines, geological evidence that tells a story older and purer than ideology ever could. Every legend about Hyperborea begins with geography, and the Earth's geology keeps rewriting that geography. Beneath the frozen crust of the Arctic lies not emptiness, but evidence, the remnants of an ancient world reshaped by ice, water, and time. The Arctic Ocean, which now appears as an eternal sheet of ice, was once a place of rivers, valleys, and dry plains. A living terrain that may have inspired the oldest myths of a land beyond the north wind. Modern science has only recently begun to see beneath that frozen veil. Using seismic mapping and deep-sea drilling, researchers have discovered that the Arctic floor is far from flat. It is crossed by mountain ranges, ridges, and continental fragments that tell a story of constant transformation. Among these structures, one stands out, the Lomonosov Ridge, a massive 1,800-kilometre-long underwater mountain chain stretching from Greenland to Siberia. Unlike the volcanic ridges of the Atlantic, the Lomonosov Ridge is continental in origin, meaning it was once part of solid land. Geological samples taken by icebreaker expeditions, including Russia's Arctica 2007 and the later Polarstern missions, reveal sediments typical of continental crust, not oceanic basalt. Fossilized pollen and marine microfossils from core samples indicate that at various points in prehistory, the ridge's peaks may have risen above sea level, forming a chain of islands or even a continuous plateau. During the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years ago, sea levels worldwide were more than 120 meters lower than today. The Arctic shelves, now submerged beneath shallow seas, would have been exposed, extending the Siberian and North American coastlines by hundreds of kilometers. The East Siberian Shelf, the largest continental shelf on Earth, once formed a vast tundra plain linking the new Siberian islands, Wrangel Island and Beringia, into a single landmass. Fossilized soils found on these islands still contain tree roots, seeds and pollen from birch, willow and larch forests, plants that cannot survive there now. This means these regions once enjoyed a milder climate, possibly during interglacial periods like the Eemian, about 125,000 years ago, when the Arctic was up to 8 degrees Celsius warmer than today. Radiocarbon dating of mammoth remains shows that large mammals roamed this land long after the last ice age began. In geological archives, the Arctic story mirrors that of Doggerland, the Stone Age plain that once connected Britain to continental Europe. Doggerland was lush, filled with rivers and game, until it sank beneath the North Sea roughly 8,000 years ago, drowned by a sudden rise in sea levels. Archaeologists have recovered tools, bones, and even footprints from its seabed, a vivid reminder of how quickly entire landscapes can vanish. The same processes likely shaped the Arctic. The immense weight of ice sheets compressed the crust beneath them, a phenomenon called glacial isostasy. When the ice melted, the land rebounded unevenly. Some regions rose while others sank. Vast plains that once lay above sea level could have been permanently flooded as meltwater poured into the Arctic Ocean. Modern sonar mapping supports this theory. Surveys of the Chukchi and Laptov seas reveal submerged terraces and channel-like formations, stair-step structures that resemble ancient shorelines. Drilling cores taken by international teams during the Arctic coring expedition found layers of peat, freshwater clays and pollen, clear evidence that these areas were once terrestrial wetlands. Some sediment layers even show ripple marks, suggesting that rivers once flowed across land where deep ocean now lies. Such data give new context to old maps. Mercator's 16th century Septentrionalium Terrarum Descriptio depicted 4 great rivers converging at the pole around a central mountain, features once dismissed as pure invention. Yet modern geological models reveal that the Arctic basin's pre-flood topography included radial drainage systems feeding into low central basins. The resemblance to the old cartographic designs is uncanny. Perhaps not coincidence, but the survival of distorted geographic memory. Geologists have also uncovered evidence of catastrophic meltwater events, torrents unleashed by collapsing ice dams. The Younger Dryas meltwater pulse, roughly 12,000 years ago, raised global sea levels by up to 20 meters in a few centuries. In the Arctic, such floods would have ripped through the lowlands, scouring riverbeds and reshaping coastlines. It is not hard to imagine how such a spectacle, land drowning, rivers reversing, whirlpools forming, could later be mythologized as the destruction of Hyperborea. In fact, the whirlpool at the pole, described in the lost Inventio Fortunata, the medieval text said to have inspired Mercator, may have been a distorted report of these meltwater vortices or gyres formed by shifting ocean currents as the polar ice retreated. A natural event recorded through the lens of awe. Satellite imaging today reveals faint circular anomalies beneath the Arctic Ocean, ancient basins carved by water flow, not tectonics. One such structure, near the Lomonosov Ridge, measures nearly 200 kilometers across and may have once been a shallow inland sea or delta. Its orientation aligns roughly with the rotational patterns seen in several early maps, though whether that resemblance holds meaning remains speculative. But perhaps the most compelling evidence lies not in the dramatic but in the subtle. Isostatic rebound maps, showing how land continues to rise after ice retreat, reveal that large portions of northern Siberia and Greenland are still adjusting to the disappearance of ancient ice sheets. This slow-motion uplift hints at how radically the Arctic's contours have changed. What we see today is not the final form, but one phase in a vast geological rhythm. If Hyperborea ever existed as land, it was likely such a transient world, a region that appeared in an interglacial window, thrived briefly, and then vanished again beneath the waves and frost. Each warming epoch brought exposure, each freeze erased the record, and yet the memory persisted. For those who migrated south as the ice returned, the Arctic would have remained not a wasteland, but a paradise lost, the cradle of warmth at the world's roof. In myth, that land became timeless. In geology, it became buried. Hyperborea, then, may not have been a continent in the literal sense, but a geological moment, a period when the North was alive. Its ruins are not stone, but strata. And in those strata, scientists continue to find the same story that myth once told, that worlds can vanish and still leave echoes strong enough to shape our imagination thousands of years later. Over the past 3 decades, ancient DNA research has redrawn humanity's map. Every new sample from permafrost, bone, or soil opens a door into prehistory. What emerges is not a simple line of descent, but a network of migrations, threads that weave through Siberia, Beringia, and the Americas. These threads match not only archaeological sites, but also the very latitudes where legend once placed Hyperborea. One of the strongest clues lies in haplogroup Q, a Y chromosome lineage passed down through paternal lines. Today, it dominates among indigenous peoples of the Americas and appears throughout Siberia, Central Asia, and Northern Europe. Its distribution traces a corridor of migration stretching from the Yenisei River basin to Alaska, across the vanished continent of Beringia, which connected Asia and North America during the last ice age. Archaeological excavations at Yana Rhinoceros Horn Site and later at Bluefish Caves in Yukon show that humans occupied these northern regions at least 27,000 years ago, long before glaciers retreated. Radiocarbon dates and genetic analysis suggest they were not isolated tribes, but part of a vast Arctic network exchanging tools, ideas, and inevitably genes. The paternal lineage, Q, branching over millennia, records that movement like a faint signature written across the genome. On the maternal side, another mystery appears: haplogroup X. This mitochondrial lineage, carried through mothers, is found in small percentages among modern Europeans and in certain Native American nations, particularly the Algonquin, Sioux, and Navajo. Curiously, it is almost absent in East Asia, which should have been the main route to the Americas. For years this puzzled scientists, until ancient DNA from Siberia revealed that one branch of X must have migrated north and west across Eurasia, tens of thousands of years before crossing into the New World. The meeting point of these two lineages, Q and X, lies precisely along the Arctic rim, the same latitudes that myth once called the land of eternal light, Ichuat. In purely genetic terms, this was not an isolated world, but a living corridor, pulsing with migration during every warm phase and emptying again when the ice returned. Ancient genome sequencing from sites like Malta near Lake Baikal, dated to 24,000 years ago, confirms this bridge between worlds. The Malta child's DNA shows affinities both to ancient Siberian and to early Native American lineages, the so-called ancient North Eurasians. These people were likely the ancestors of those who would populate both Europe and the Americas after the Ice Age, spreading out from northern refuges that briefly flourished between glaciers. Genetics, of course, cannot reveal a civilization. It cannot show temples or myths. But it does reveal mobility, a pattern of expansion and retreat that mirrors the climate cycles described earlier. Each interglacial pulse opened new land for a few thousand years, allowing migration and innovation. Each freeze forced those populations southward, where they mingled with others and preserved memories of the world they had lost. When these northern peoples moved, they took more than tools. They carried language. Linguistic studies comparing Uralic, Altaic, and early Indo-European roots reveal a shared vocabulary related to snow, light, and sky, words that may have diverged from a common Arctic origin. The Proto-Indo-European root bear, meaning bright or white, appears in both Boreas, the north wind, and later terms for morning and north. Even language, it seems, remembers the light. Archaeogenetic timelines match this migration story with remarkable precision. Around 20,000 years ago, people inhabited the Beringian Plains, an immense steppe now buried under the Arctic Ocean. Between 16,000 and 14,000 years ago, some crossed into the Americas, carrying haplogroup Q. Between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, others spread west into Scandinavia as the ice sheets retreated, leaving genetic traces that still linger in the Sami and Finno-Ugric peoples. These genetic pathways map onto what climatologists call refugia, pockets of habitable land during glacial extremes. One such refuge likely existed near the Kolyma River and the new Siberian islands, precisely where the Hyperborean myths later seem to converge. But the story doesn't end with DNA. The archaeological record of these Arctic populations shows advanced adaptation, tailored clothing, ivory needles, and complex dwellings built into permafrost mounds. Such ingenuity supports the idea of a culture with shared knowledge passed along those genetic routes, a northern knowledge belt stretching from Eurasia to the Americas. Linguists studying oral epics among the Chukchi, Yakut, and Saami have identified recurring imagery: the sun that never sets, the river that circles the world, the mountain where light returns. These aren't random metaphors. They describe real polar phenomena: the midnight sun, the circumpolar rivers of glacial valleys, and the optical illusions of solar halos on the horizon. Over generations, observation became myth, myth became lineage. In this way, genetic heritage and cultural memory intertwine. The same people whose DNA we trace in ancient Siberia may be the ancestors of those who first told the stories of a northern paradise lost to cold. When their landscapes drowned under rising seas, memory replaced geography. Genetics gives the story its biological outline, faint but tangible. It reminds us that knowledge, like genes, travels through survival. Ideas and myths follow the same roads as people, carried across generations in both blood and speech. Hyperborea, then, may represent not a vanished empire, but a shared memory encoded in our very cells. The memory of a world at the edge of light, where humanity first learned that even in the coldest places, life endures. From these living traces in our DNA, the next step turns toward the visible legacy, the symbols carved in stone, the solar spirals and polar alignments that suggest a philosophy born under the Arctic sky, carried southward through time. If the Arctic once nurtured peoples who later scattered across the continents, their ruins may not be carved in marble or granite, but in memory, geometry, and light. What survives of their legacy is not a city, but a pattern, repeated shapes, alignments, and symbols that reappear across the ancient world as though humanity were remembering the same idea in different tongues. Circles of stone aligned to the sun, spirals carved into cliffs, temples that face the solstice dawn. None of these alone prove Hyperborea, but together they hint at a shared northern worldview, one born beneath a sky where the sun itself circled the horizon without setting. Across thousands of years and miles, the same design recurs: the circle, the first and most sacred of forms. The earliest examples are not grand monuments, but shelters. Arctic dwellers built round homes to conserve heat and deflect wind. From the Sami lavu to the Inuit igloo, their structures followed the same geometry as the sun's arc, enclosing warmth within an endless curve. Even the hearth placed at the centre echoed the polar sun burning at the heart of a frozen world. When humanity moved south, that shape followed. The same circular design appears in megalithic temples of Malta, in the Tholos tombs of Mycenae, and in the Nabta Playa stone circle of southern Egypt, one of the oldest known astronomical monuments built over 7,000 years ago. There, upright stones mark the solstice sunrise and sunset, mirroring the principle later perfected at Stonehenge and Goseck Circle in Germany. All three share a single obsession: the return of light. For people who had once endured months of winter darkness, that cycle was not just seasonal, it was existential. To those early sky watchers, the sun was not a rising orb, but a circle that turned endlessly. At high latitudes, it moves not up and down, but around, a slow spiral of fire along the horizon. Generations of Arctic hunters and herders grew up under this motion, seeing day as a wheel rather than a line. When their descendants migrated south, they carried that visual memory with them. The result may be what we now see carved into rock faces around the world: the spiral, the wheel, the disc, the radiant eye, universal icons of the sun's motion through the heavens. On the cliffs of Karelia, Scandinavia, and the shores of Lake Onega, Neolithic artists carved thousands of spirals, rays, and concentric circles, some arranged in trios, others aligned to solstice directions. The same motifs appear in Anatolia's Göbekli Tepe, on Irish Newgrange stones, and in petroglyphs of the American Southwest. Archaeologists once called this coincidence of invention, but coincidence alone cannot explain why so many cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, turned to the same solar geometry. Perhaps they were not inventing anew, but remembering, fragments of a symbolic language born in a world where light itself moved in circles. That memory also took vertical form: the axis, the world's invisible pillar. In every major cosmology, there is a structure that joins heaven and earth, a mountain, tree, or tower connecting realms. In Norse myth, it is Yggdrasil, the world tree binding the 9 realms. In Hindu cosmology, it is Mount Meru, the golden peak at the center of all worlds. In Egypt, the Djed pillar symbolized Osiris's backbone, stability and rebirth. In Mesoamerica, the Maya imagined the Cheba tree rising from the underworld to the sky. Though their environments differed, the meaning remained constant. The world turns around a single sacred axis, the cosmic north. This concept mirrors the real celestial pole, the point around which the stars rotate each night. Ancient astronomers who observed this motion would have recognized that the heavens revolve around an unchanging center. That point, invisible but constant, became the ultimate symbol of order. It is no coincidence that so many temples and tombs are oriented toward true north. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, is aligned within 1/15 of a degree to the cardinal directions, a precision so extreme that it likely served a symbolic purpose. The pyramids of Teotihuacan, the temples of Angkor, and even Neolithic long barrows in Britain share the same northward reverence. From these alignments we glimpse not just technical skill, but cosmology, an awareness that stability on Earth depends on harmony with the heavens. Even language preserves this orientation. In many Indo-European tongues, words for right, law, and truth come from roots meaning sunward or toward the light. The Sanskrit word rta refers to the natural order of the universe. The Latin rectus means straight and just, and from the same root comes our English word right. In both language and design, alignment with light became a symbol of balance. To live upright was to live in harmony with the axis of the world. Symbols of the wheel, the spiral, and the pillar thus form a triad: geometry, motion, and balance, the same three principles that define Arctic life. For early humans who endured endless night, orientation to the sun was not philosophy, it was survival. When those communities migrated, their cosmology moved with them, embedding itself in design, ritual, and myth. Archaeologists studying petroglyph sequences from northern Russia to Mongolia note that as the Ice Age ended, circular motifs spread southward in tandem with population movements traced in DNA. The people who brought new technologies, weaving, sled transport, stone drilling, may have carried a worldview shaped by the same celestial environment that inspired Hyperborea's myth. Over time, that worldview evolved into diverse traditions. The solar calendars of Egypt, the fire festivals of Europe, and the spiral suns painted on Pueblo Canyon walls. Even in the classical era, echoes persisted. The Greek temple of Apollo at Delphi, aligned toward the northern mountains, was said to receive the god's light from Hyperborea each winter when he journeyed north. At Delos, the island of Apollo's birth, priests honored the Hyperboreans as bringers of sacred offerings, the same guardians of light described by the poets. Myth and architecture converged. Geometry became theology. These parallels do not prove a single origin, but they speak to a continuity of vision. Whether born from common ancestry or convergent experience, humanity's oldest builders and storytellers seem to have shared an intuition that life depends on knowing the rhythm of light, and that civilization begins when we learn to mark its return. If Hyperborea left no temples of its own, it may yet survive in every circle carved into stone, every axis aligned to the stars. The builders who traced the sun's path at dawn were performing the same ritual as their imagined northern ancestors, a quiet act of reverence toward the sky. And as modern scientists now uncover lost coastlines beneath Arctic seas, perhaps memory and matter are meeting again. The Earth, like myth, keeps archives. Its strata record the world that birthed these ideas, a world of light and shadow, frozen and thawed, remembered and reborn. That is where the story of Hyperborea comes full circle, not as a lost civilization, but as a pattern of consciousness, an ancient alignment between sky and mind, rediscovered each time humanity looks north and wonders what was once there. Today, the Arctic is once again changing. What was once buried under kilometers of ice is beginning to reappear. As glaciers melt and permafrost recedes, radar surveys and satellite imaging reveal riverbeds, valleys, and fossilized soils that have not seen sunlight in tens of thousands of years. For scientists, this is a warning about the speed of climate change. For those who study humanity's deep past, it is something else. A reopening of the record. In 2020, teams analysing Greenland's ice cores detected layers of preserved vegetation deep beneath the sheet, proving that the island was ice-free within the last million years, possibly during an interglacial warm period when tundra and forests reached the pole. Around the same time, Arctic researchers found traces of ancient DNA in permafrost across Siberia, revealing entire ecosystems and human presence in areas long considered uninhabitable. These discoveries don't confirm the legends of Hyperborea, but they make them harder to dismiss outright. The idea that the far north once sustained life is no longer speculation. It is data. The irony is that the more science uncovers, the more it echoes the oldest stories. The Greeks said Hyperborea was the land of eternal light, and indeed for much of the summer the Arctic sun never sets. They spoke of a place beyond Boreas, beyond the reach of cold winds, and paleoclimate evidence shows there were ages when the pole was temperate. They described a people in harmony with the cycles of nature, and archaeology shows that ancient Arctic populations mastered the rhythms of migration, ice, and daylight better than most of humanity ever would. What makes Hyperborea compelling is not the possibility that it existed as an empire, but that it represents a persistent human memory of a time when the planet was different and when survival demanded awareness of the Earth's delicate balance. Every age projects its fears and hopes onto the unknown. For the ancients, the North was both. It was a symbol of perfection and a reminder of fragility. Today, as ice sheets thin and sea levels rise, the myth feels less like fantasy and more like prophecy. We are again standing at a threshold, watching the boundaries between land and sea, past and future, shift. The old question, what lies beyond the north wind, is no longer rhetorical. Beneath that wind, we are finding the layers of our own forgotten history. Hyperborea, whether it was a real place or not, now serves another purpose. It forces us to consider how much of human memory survives in story, and how much truth may sleep beneath the ice, waiting for the world to thaw. The story ends where it began, with the north wind, silent but persistent. It still carries fragments of what came before: myths, migrations, symbols, and the faint pulse of civilizations erased but not forgotten. If you followed this far, take a moment to listen, not just to the legend, but to the land itself. The ice is melting, the earth is speaking again, and what it reveals might yet rewrite our history. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts below. Tell us, where are you watching from tonight?